ever wondered how people can go camping in the winter when you get cold just waiting for the bus? The cold weather doesn't require discomfort. You just have to prepare yourself to live a little differently. Not worse, just differently. You might eat some more food, do a little bit of exercise, and wear the right clothing. There's only one secret, and that is that you prepare yourself mentally to be out in the cold for an extended period of time. And that is something that is not all that hard to do. You can do it without ever having a fire. Seriously, if you are prepared, dressed right, and follow some of the other rules, you can be outside for several days without a fire. Anyway, I'm going to show you some basic rules for dressing in cold weather for an extended period of time. Now, whether you go camping, skiing, or just live in Minnesota, you can probably apply these rules to your dressing needs in the winter. Okay, first we start with the bottom layer, underwear. The rule here is non-absorbent. So use a material like wool or this polypropylene, which isn't going to hold any water. Now, the old material that we're all familiar with is the cotton thermal underwear. This stuff holds water, holds a lot of water, and it holds it close to your skin. So no matter how many layers of quilting you put over it, you're going to stay cold. Now, with something that's non-absorbent during the day when you're exercising, it's really important because you're blowing a lot of sweat through these things, and you don't want to get them wet and damp and clammy, and then you're going to be cold. The other thing that I've been mentioning here is layers. Okay, this is your bottom layer, and you're going to be putting more layers on it. And that's the best way to regulate the amount of clothing you need for a given activity level. During the day when you're moving around, you probably don't need much over your underwear. But what you do have should once again be a fairly non-absorbent fabric. Wool tends to be a high choice on my list. If you can't wear wool, though, there are plenty of synthetics that do just fine. When moving around, you follow the next rule, ventilate. Never let yourself overheat. It happens surprisingly easy once you start moving around. You may also give some thought to wearing shirts and pants with good pockets to carry your most needed small gear. As you start to lessen your activity, you begin to add layers, and you start to go for more bulky clothing. The bulk or loft is really just how much air the material is trapping next to you. You might take a bulky loose weave sweater and put a close weave shell over it, not one that fits tightly or you lose that airspace. You're shooting for dead airspace, one where the air in it is warmed and then trapped in the insulation, not moving around. This is where down is so warm. It does a real good job of holding that warm air right next to you. Now let's say the weather closes down and gets very cold and nasty. You put on more loose bulk. And cover it with a loose-fitting rain or wind gear. The final layers should not be heavy. They only need to be non-absorbent, bulky, and windproof. And you can literally stand around all evening in below zero weather. There are two other important points to remember about your extreme cold weather gear. And the first one is you should make sure it's stuff that you can put on easily without taking off any of your other layers. So you'd never have to worry about exposing yourself when the weather's really closed down. Okay? And the second one is that your absolute last piece of cold weather gear is your sleeping bag. And this is an area that bears a little bit of attention when you're picking one to go out camping in. Okay? Now, I don't want to appear and sound ominous about this stuff. It's just that you should pay some attention to the extreme severe weather, because if you figured out what you're going to do then and prepared for it, then you don't have to worry about it because you know you've covered your bases. The practice of layering, venting, and keeping dry in general is for use on all parts of your body, but in one area in particular should you always lean towards the covered end. Now, people wear all kinds of different things to cover their head. A regular stocking hat is a good one. This is a balaclava, and this is one that can be pulled down to cover most of your face. It's made out of thick wool with polypropylene on the inside, so it's real comfortable. And this is the full face mask. Now all of these are real good for that kind of bulky insulation that's just going to hold your heat in close to you. Something I'm kind of a fan of is to bring along a scarf, because it'll plug those little gaps between all the rest of your armor that the wind is going to get through. And the wind is something you really have to be aware of with your head. A hood works really well. Another thing that works well are those hats that have a sort of a windproof top with a liner on the inside. All of these are worn together. It works the same layering system as the rest of your body. In fact, the area that seems to be the best idea of layering is your hands, because you need to have a lot covering your hands to keep them warm, but then you can't have much over them in order to do fine work. So the layers on your hands start with a pair of light liners. Synthetic fabrics tend to outlast wool here. Then you cover this liner with a glove that you can do general work in. This is where a person might wear a leather glove. Another option might be a mitten, which is a bit harder to work in, but much warmer. And in windy or very cold situations, a pair of choppers or big overmitts are just great. Through the day, you will switch through the layers to work or warm up. A couple of good practices are to carry a spare pair of liners in a pocket or under your belt. And the event that your hands get wet or really cold, you have a warm pair right there that you can slip into. And then you can put that wet pair inside your pocket or your belt or something like that, and it'll dry out real well through the day. And if you use leather gloves or ski gloves, you have to remember they will freeze. And this means you're going to have to sleep with them. Now some people still like to use the leather ones because they're so good for working with. Now, probably one of the hardest areas to get right are your feet. And that's because, well, to start with, you have socks, and there's a lot of different kinds you can go from. Wool socks, they work well. There's a lot of different synthetic ones. Once again, polypropylene kind of tends to be the top. There's silk, and some people swear by cotton. Now, cotton, remember, is absorbent, and your wet feet don't stay warm, but some people say they do, and so it works for some. You'll have to experiment. Another area that's kind of hard is the boot. That's because your boot has to satisfy a lot of requirements. It has to be rigid to give you support, like a hiking boot, and also has to have a lot of bulk to keep your feet warm. And you want to get a lot of that bulk in the bottom between your foot and the snow. That's where you're losing a lot of the heat as far as your feet are concerned. Now you can take something like this Sora, which has got more rigidity than the Muckluck, and it's got a lot more insulation than the hiking boot. And this works real well. If you kind of are a little careful about it, you pick one with a wider throat. It's easier to get your foot into it in the morning, and that is important in the morning. The other thing you can do with a boot like this, though, that'll take a perfectly good boot and ruin it, is to take too many socks, put them all on, and stuff your foot in here. Because if it's too tight, your feet aren't going to stay warm. They cut off the circulation, and you'll get cold. If your trip is going to include a lot of hiking, you may find that the higher quality brands give more support. This doesn't necessarily mean they're warmer, but a few days trip will be more fun if your feet feel good. The big factor in boots, after keeping you warm, is whether they freeze in the morning. All of these boots here have something that's absorbent in them. And you'll find out that something like these hiking boots and these Mucklucks, if it's at all wet or if you've worked hard and gotten good and sweaty, they will be blocks of ice in the morning. For most people, that about does it. They learn one time, and next year you come out with something that's maybe got less rubber, especially, or pardon me, less leather, rubber in the areas that matter, and what leather that is there you can treat somewhat. In some cases, say for instance if you're skiing, you should carry a lightweight overboot made purely to keep your feet warm when standing around. These overboots are a specialty item made of lightweight materials and real high quality insulation. They're not really useful in any situation other than standing around in a campsite in the wintertime. But the rest of the gear is commonly available and not necessarily expensive. I'd like to finish by pointing out that dressing for winter is dressing smart, not expensively. Most of the equipment that you need to put together a good winter outfit can be had at a secondhand store. You might have to do a little experimenting, maybe a little bit of modifying, but not too much of it. And you won't have to spend necessarily a lot of money, like I said. And remember, once you've got that kit together and you have the right mental attitude that you're going to do fine, you can be comfortable in the winter.